Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the Talk With Kiet podcast, where we connect people, ideas, and capital to help make a difference in the world. Today, I'm so lucky to have Isabelle Pagnotta on with me. She's a partner at Inflexion. Isabelle and I today will talk about her amazing career journey in private equity and just in general, the world of private equity. Private equity, when you think about it, it's taking over the world. So let's get a bit of understanding of what it is. Isabelle, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for agreeing to be on here.
Thank you, Kit. Happy New Year to you as well.
Yeah, so part of people's New Year's resolution is, of course, about career, right? Where they want to be in the career, how they want to get started. So how did you get started in private equity? Like, how do you get your feet in the door?
Yes, that's a good question, actually. I started my career in investment banking in London at an investment bank that no longer exists called Bursters. And that was in 2000. And I was advising different clients, including private equity clients, on M&A transactions. And at that time, I realized actually it's great to be an advisor, but actually shouldn't it be so much more interesting to be the principal? So the one that's going to decide where do I invest, the money, and then look at, the companies you back and see them grow and evolve. That would be much more interesting. And that's how I started to be more and more interested into private equity. And at the time, a firm was putting an ad in the Financial Times to hire a couple of juniors, and I replied to the ad, and 6 months afterwards they hired me. So that's how I started in private equity. It was a bit of luck, effectively, but I really don't regret, because it's been an extraordinary journey, and it's been 20 years actually since I've been in private equity, and I keep learning every day. I really enjoy what I do.
Now, you timed it quite right? Because 20 years ago, private equity wasn't this big of a thing. Like today, it's everywhere.
Yes, that's true. 20 years ago, it was still a big part of private capital.
Yeah.
But it has evolved, and now you have trillions of money being invested in private equity. Pension funds allocate a good portion of their allocations into this asset class, because it's a good hedging to public markets, and also you have the ability to really create value on the longer term.
So given how the industry's changed today, like if you were to have a fresh start again to get your feet in, like how could someone get their feet into the private equity space as a career?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would advise the person to first do a first role in either investment banking or management consulting, but very much trying to build up some technical skills around the job, because it is quite a varied job. You need to be able to understand financials, you need to be able to undertake diligence, but far and foremost, you need to like people, because private equity is all about people. You back management teams, you back a founder, and yes, you're going to invest money behind them, but it's all about the chemistry you create, the relationship you create with those people. Because, it's one thing to invest in the company, but then you sort of marry this company for a couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years. So you need to really enjoy that longer term relationship with people.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I am impressed and amazed as well is in private equity, in general in the space, I don't see a lot of like senior women, right? Like you're a partner at a very big firm. Like how was that journey about in terms of just climbing through the ranks as a woman or as a minority, like myself, right, in general?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say that in general, there are not that many women in private equity, and especially 20 years ago, they were even less so than now.
Yeah.
It has evolved, and we are working hard to attract more and more female, but also ethnic minorities, because it is very important to have a diversified type of investors, effectively. We don't want, people thinking the same way. So how do you manage to grow through the ranks? Well, I would say, first and foremost, I think you need to really like what you do. You need to enjoy private equity to be able to sustain, because it's not a race, it's a marathon. And if you want to build a career in private equity, you need to thrive in this environment. So you need to like doing deals, and you need to enjoy the adrenaline, effectively. I think one important thing is to be able to learn how to be imperfect, because especially when you start a young family and you have a lot of demand on you between job, where you're still an intermediate level and trying to grow up through the ranks, and then having, let's say, young babies, you juggle a lot of things. And at the end of the day, you're not going to do perfectly everywhere. But I think you learn to be imperfect, you learn to be flexible. And another important thing is that you need to have a good support system around you to be able to allow you to work and be flexible in the job. Because private equity, as we know, is not a 9-to-5 job, and there are a lot of demands on you. So when you work on a live deal, you're going to spend some evenings, weekends working on this, and therefore having a support system around you with, let's say, a nanny, a super supportive husband or wife is absolutely paramount.
Yeah. How do you juggle that mentally? Being a parent, like in the case being a mother, like mothers play critical roles to their kids, right? Like how do you juggle that with to the demand? Like how do you manage that mentally?
I think it becomes natural, right? I've always seen myself not just as a working person, nor as a full-time stay-at-home mom. I've always seen myself as a independent woman with a career, but who can also have kids. I think you can have it all. You just need to manage it, and as you say, be flexible in your mindset, right? So it's about the quality time you spend with your kids, especially when you go back from work. You need to be 100% with them. You can't just be with them and still looking at your emails on your phone, right?
Yeah. No, that's right. Like listen, I'm the dad, so I don't play as an important role as my wife, right? The kids love my wife no matter what. But I remember seeing a picture. I was at my cousin's wedding, and my wife showed me a picture, and there's my kids surrounding me, trying to get my attention. I was closing a deal at the time. We were buying someone, and I was literally on my phone, ignoring my kids. And when I saw that, I felt so guilty mentally. I'm like, okay, I need to do a better job as a dad, right, when I'm there. And so it's that guilt trip sometimes, right? That gets you.
Yes, but equally, kids understand that it's not just about them, but it's also about the well-being and the happiness of their parents, right?
Yeah.
I think if their parents have a job they love and they enjoy what they do, I think it does show on you as a person. And I think the kids feel it.
Yeah.
I also think it is important to show to the kids that, especially daughters, that moms can have, full careers and still be very good mom, because it's all about, also role models. And it's about showing them that they have the same abilities and the same opportunities as boys.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. So let's touch on private equity. So what is private equity? Like how does it work? Like, oh, do you just knock on like Warren Buffett people's door and say, I'm gonna buy you out? Like, how does all that work?
Well, look at it. Private equity is private money that you invest in private companies. I work for Inflexion, which is a European private equity firm headquartered in London, and we invest in the mid-cap segment, which is very much companies that are already profitable and have a management team or a founder and need capital to accelerate growth. So they are most of the time at an inflection point, and they need this additional capital to, either make an acquisition or just really grow faster in new geographies, new territories, or create a new segment, for example, of activities. And we have the ability to invest as majority investors. That's when we control, the company, or we can also invest as minority investor. And in that case, the founder stays in control, and we are there, as basically a helper to accelerate the growth of the company. So we have this flexibility of capital.
It's one of the things where I do foresee, I run to a lot of business owners, right? A lot of private companies. And in the US alone, there's 2.3 million small businesses that are owned by what I call baby boomers, right? That next generation of transition, right? I'm sure Europe is the same thing. Like, how does it come into play in terms of, what you do?
It's actually a very, very good point. Because this generation of baby boomers is coming to retirement, and there are some the new generation is not always interested in taking over the company of the parents. And we, depending on the private equity firms, but I think at Inflexion we have the ability to provide a solution whereby we can come either, as I said, as a majority investor or as minority investor. And I would say in the case of a founder who doesn't have a succession, in place, and who's interested in transition out and therefore, sell some equity, but still stay in control of the company.
Yeah.
I think this can be quite an interesting solution, because the founders still, is in charge of the strategy, but at the same time, he has the ability, he or she has the ability to connect with a private equity firm, get their opinion on strategy, on acquisitions, as well as obviously additional equity.
Yeah. And how do you see, I guess, how do you see the next evolution of private equity? So you've seen the journey in the last 20 years. How do you see the private equity industry evolving in the next 20 years? And in particular, around diversity and inclusion of people like you and I, right, in this space as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm not sure I have full answers to that. What I would say that it's a continued evolution. As you said, private equity has evolved a lot, and valuations have increased over the past 10 years to a point where you always wonder, is that a bubble that's going to explode, right? Because at some point it is harder and harder to make money if you buy companies at a very expensive multiple. I do think that at the moment, given what's happening, in this economic environment and recession background, valuations are becoming, I would say, are actually becoming sort of lower. And this is not a bad thing, because private equity is not just about financial engineering, even if we put debt in the transaction structure. It's also about growth. And if you buy a company for, a slightly cheaper multiple, then it's going to be easier to generate returns because you won't be so much under pressure to just focus on repaying the debt in your capital.
Yeah.
I think that in terms of the industry itself, what we've seen over the past 20 years is more and more particular strategies within private equity. There is a lot of, I would say, there's more distressed funds, there's more growth funds, there's industry-specific funds like consumer funds now, or obviously tech funds. I think we'll see more and more specialization over the next couple of years because it's all about industry knowledge and ability for investors to understand underlying trends of specific industries. That way, investors are becoming quicker to make decisions on companies they want to invest in. And I think we'll see more and more of that trend. We may also see more public to private transactions because, at the moment, public markets are going through,
There's a massive discount, right? There's a lot of discount out there.
Exactly. And therefore, it is becoming easier to buy companies on the stock exchange. So we'll see more of that in the coming years, which I think is great because, a lot of mid-sized companies, I'm not quite sure they have a real reason to be listed. Small mid-sized companies actually would benefit from a private environment and have more flexibility, less reporting requirements to focus on growth.
No, exactly. I mean, if you're like a sub-billion-dollar company or enterprise, like you shouldn't be public, in my personal view, right? Because it's just too tricky to operate. But then let's talk about access because private equity is definitely private money, right? A lot of times is what is pensions, institutional money, etc. As regular investors, do you see that changing where there could be access to individuals or retail into the future?
It's a very interesting point. There are more and more individuals, high net worth individuals, but also just people who have some money and who are keen to invest in other things than public markets. There is actually an interesting platform called Moonfair that offers that. They offer the ability to invest in private equity funds for individuals like you and I. And I think this is a very smart move because it is good for private equity firms not to rely just on institutional money. And it is good for the individuals as well to diversify their portfolio.
So is that you see the next growth phase in the future for the market, or?
I think that, look, institutional money is always going to represent the bunch of LPs for private equity, for sure. But I think there will be more and more individuals and just sort of, people's money being allocated in private equity, which I think is a good thing because, private equity is part of the economy, right? And therefore, people should be very interested in that. Now, the flip side is that when you invest in private equity, your investment is quite illiquid because you're basically stuck for 8, 9, 10 years by the time a fund has been invested and then money is being returned to investor. So I think that's the important part to bear in mind.
Yeah. And so when you're going in and you're investing in these deals, like in instances where you take a majority stake, like do you actually get involved inside the business? Like you operate, like do you learn like different types of businesses, different type of business models and stuff like that, or?
Absolutely. I think this is what I enjoy most about private equity, because you learn about so many different type of businesses, right? And every management team is different, which is great. So I've very much invested for the past 15 years in the services space, which is obviously very wide in terms of sector. And that includes verticals like testing and inspection, human capital, professional services, technical services. So different type of services. And, I've met so many different and talented management teams, and they are all passionate about their business, which is really refreshing, and you're really excited when you meet those management teams.
Yeah.
So yes, I've learned about so many different businesses and so many industries as well, from tech staffing and consulting to environmental consulting to calibration. It's been a great journey. But when you've invested in the company as the private equity investor, you don't go into the company. You're very much you're partnering with the management team at board level. So you meet the management team very regularly to discuss the strategy, any issues with the business, any potential M&A opportunities, but your involvement is very much at the strategic level. So that's how we influence and partner effectively with management. We are backers of management teams, so we rely on management to operate the business.
Yeah. And when and you don't have to go into full details, but what are some of the things you look for to say, okay, this deal makes sense?
It's a good question. Couple of important things. First of all, we invest in profitable companies, so the company needs to generate already, EBITDA effectively. For us, it's very important that the company is a good leader or participant in a specific industry, and therefore has a strong market share in this industry. That the company is growing organically, generates margins, and what I like is when you have multiple levers of growth. So not only do you have organic growth, but also you have the ability to do M&A with a company. So if the company can buy competitors or targets, that's a great way to create value, because you most of the time you're able to buy at a very interesting multiple, and therefore from a multiple arbitrage point of view, it is extremely accretive. And the last point is management. You want to invest in a company with a strong management, who's ambitious, who's driven, but who's also open-minded and able to listen to ideas from the investors. You want to be able to have a relationship with this management team. As I said at the beginning, it's all about people, because you need to be able to influence, have a dialogue, and agree on a strategy for the business.
Yeah, because how do you strike the balance? Because I've talked to some business owners where it's like, "Kid, I built this from scratch. I know how all this works," right? And they're still stuck to, this is the way it's gotta be. Like, how do you strike that balance when you say it's actually a great opportunity, but this person is stubborn?
It's an art, I would say. Because you need to be able to influence, but you can't force an idea on a management team if they don't like it, right? So you need to be able to influence them to the point that they realize, oh, actually, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought about it, but why not?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think the investor needs to be humble and recognize that they'll never be better than a management team, because a management live and breathe their business. We as investor, are on the board of different companies, but we'll never be as experts at them. So it's all about influencing and communication. And that's why enjoying being with people is so important in private equity.
Yeah, no, it does, and it's interesting because in a way, every day your job is different, right? It changes because it depends on the types of business, types of deals you deal with, and it just fluctuates, right? It's constantly challenging you in a new way.
Absolutely. It's no, I'm laughing today because I'm working on a deal, and in the morning I don't know what my day is going to be made of, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating because you just discover new things, you learn new things. It's what makes this job so interesting, I have to say.
Yeah. Now, going back a little bit, when we talked about diversity and inclusion for this industry, in your view, what are some of the things that are trending now, happening now in the industry that looks promising to you to attract more diverse talents? But also, the second part of the question is, what more can the industry do to get us to a much more diversified talent pool?
That's a really good point, and it's something we've been working on for a few years now. So, look, there's a lot we can do to attract different type of talent and increase the diversity pool. I think first we start with educating people at a university stage. It's important to explain at that time that a career in private equity is possible even if you're a female and or an ethnic minority, because you have the ability to thrive, because we need different type of talents. So it starts with this type of education at university or business school. And at Inflexion, actually, we regularly visit business schools, to present our firm and explain that this career is for everyone. Look at me, right?
Yeah.
I work for a London headquartered private equity firm, and I'm a French female. It hasn't been an issue. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is to retain the talent you have. And I think in order to retain talent you have, you need to put in place different type of policies within your firm. And that starts with flexible working. You need to be able to allow your staff to work in a flexible manner, to be able to juggle different demands. I think this is very important. Now, equally, people need to be aware that when you work, let's say, on a live transaction and you need to be with your other team members, then it may be easier to be in the office. So I think this flexible mindset is very important. And then I think, the last thing is probably around just talking about it like we are doing today, right? I think making people aware that we need more diversity in private equity, but also just in finance generally, right? And that diversity is very, very good and it's healthy. In private equity, you want to be able to have different people, different opinions, challenging each other, whether this is a really good deal to do or not, right? If people think the same way, it's never going to be a debate or a challenge, right? Because it will all have the same opinion. So I think just discussing it in an open manner and forum like we're doing is also very one of the good way of increasing awareness.
No, agree 1,000%. And I know you're on a live transaction, so I'm not gonna take up more of your time, but this has been amazing and tremendous. And I gotta say, you're extremely talented. Every time I talk to you, I learn so much. And so I know why you are where you are, because you work hard, you're smart, you're collaborative, you're humble. And it's a great example of what good looks like. And your great guidance, because I think representation matters. Part of the reason why I launched this podcast, say, hey, I'm an Asian dude, face minority. I was a refugee, right? Look, I'm hosting a podcast, talking to amazing people like yourself. And I hope, people like me, people like you, to be able to be where we are is a hopeful sign that hard work, dedication, and the constant focus of learning, collaborating, right, will get you there. And this industry is amazing, right? We love to have more participants in and attract all these talents. So thank you so much for being on today. As customary, where we usually ask the guests in the end is, what is the ask from the audience from your perspective?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, thank you very much, Kiet. I think it's been a great, great chatting with you. And what I would say is, look, if anyone is looking for private equity money and support and investment, I'm available. Feel free to email me. I'd be delighted to chat with you and advise you to the extent I can.
Great. Thank you, Isabelle. And to the audience, Happy New Year. Thank you for your continued support. As customary, because it's early in the new year, today we touched on career. Next week, we're going to touch on financial planning. So I will have Rick on. Rick is the founder and CEO of Midas Wealth. So we'll talk with Rick about his entrepreneur career, as well as proper strategy to plan for financial freedom. So thank you and have a great and blessed week. Speak soon.
Thank you.